Rain drummed on the windshield of the car as Tyra Morrow pulled up in front of the house in the Boston suburbs. It was a typical American mansion, 2 stories high, with a well-kept but slightly neglected garden. A red ribbon of police fencing already encircled the property. She parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the chilly spring downpour. Tyra was 38, and in 15 years on the force, she'd seen a lot. But each new murder left its mark a thin scar on her soul, invisible to those around her. "Detective Morrow," Officer Jenkins called out to her, holding an umbrella over his head. "There are 2 bodies inside, a man and a woman, pretty nasty looking and smelling." "Who called it in?" Tyra asked, walking up the rain-slick stairs. "A woman named Audrey Kane said this was her house and the dead were her husband and younger sister." Tyra nodded and stepped inside. The heavy, stifling odor of decomposition hit her nostrils, making her cringe and cover her nose with her sleeve. The hallway smelled of dampness and the sickly, sweet odor of rotting flesh, an odor unlike anything she'd ever encountered beyond the living room. She could see the kitchen, where forensic scientists in masks and hazmat suits were working. In the corner of the living room sat a woman, slender, with short brown hair and a pale face. Audrey Kane. Tyra would have given her a little over 30, but there was something in her eyes that made her look older, the emptiness of someone who'd lost too much. "Miss Kane, I'm Detective Tyra Morrow," she introduced herself, taking a seat across from me. "Tell me what happened." Audrey looked up at her. No tears, just cold detachment. "I got out of Framingham prison this morning, 13 years for tax fraud. Came home and found this, she said calmly, as if the smell of decomposing bodies didn't bother her. She nodded toward the kitchen where the investigation team was working. Tyra studied the woman, trying to read more into her face than the words said. "Did you call the police right away?" "Yes. As soon as I walked in and saw the bodies, I dialed 911. The dispatcher said to stay on the line and not to touch anything. So I did." Tyra wrote down her words, then got up and walked over to the scene. There were 2 bodies lying on the kitchen floor. A man, about 35 years old, well-built, wearing an expensive but now blood-drenched suit. Next to him was a young woman, barely in her 20s, with long blonde hair that swept around her head like an ominous halo. Both with multiple stab wounds, their skin grayish in color and already beginning to show signs of decomposition. "What have we got?" Tyra asked, turning to forensic scientist Ray Lomax, who was already working on the bodies. "Preliminary. Death occurred approximately 3 days ago. The temperature of the bodies, rigor mortis, which has already passed, and the beginning of decomposition indicate exactly that both killed with the same weapon, presumably a hunting knife with serrations. The killer was strong, deep, decisive blows." That stench. Were the windows closed the whole time? Looks like it. Plus the heat was on. Perfect conditions to accelerate decomposition. Tyra sat down, took a closer look at the bodies, then turned back to Audrey. "Can you confirm their identities?" "Elliot Kane, my husband, and Vance Prentice, my younger sister." Audrey's voice didn't waver. "I guess she's a Kane now, too. At least that's what I've been told." "What do you mean?" Audrey folded her hands in her lap. "I sat down for him, to Elliot. Our precious metals mining company, Kane Minerals, was starting to run into trouble. We were hiding income from the IRS. I took the blame so he could keep the business going. He promised to wait, promised to give us a secure old age." There was a bitterness in her voice. "And instead he married my sister. They sent me the wedding photos 3 years ago. For information, you know, just so I'd know. 13 years I rotted in prison for him." "You kept in touch?" "He wrote me the first half of my sentence, swore he loved me, said he was waiting. Then the letters became less frequent, and after he married Vance, they stopped altogether. His sister wrote a couple times. She apologized, said she couldn't choose love." Tyra nodded, taking notes. "When exactly did you get out of prison?" 8 o'clock this morning. I have my release papers with me. It's time-stamped." "And how did you get here?" "Cab. The driver can vouch for that." He was surprised he was taking someone straight from the prison gates. Tyra wrote that down too. Audrey clearly knew she was the prime suspect and had her alibi in place. "Did you have any contact with anyone while you were incarcerated?" Besides your ex-husband and sister? My lawyer, sometimes former co-workers. The business was a family business, but we had other people working for us. One of the officers brought Tyra a folder with preliminary data. She flipped through the documents. Does your company still exist? Kane Minerals? Yes. Elliot has managed to keep it going and even expand it as far as I know. Tyra continued to study the papers. The company had really prospered in recent years, with annual sales of several $million. Were you the president of the company before the imprisonment? Co-founder. Elliot and I started together when we were in our 20s. I did finance, he did operations. Tyra nodded, noticing how calmly Audrey talked about the company as if it were 100 years ago. No shadow of emotion about the dead, no reaction to the horrible smell of decomposition. When was the last time you spoke to your husband or sister? A letter from Vance came 6 months ago. I haven't heard from Elliot in over 3 years. What was the last letter from your sister? She told me she was pregnant. Wanted me to know I was going to be an aunt. Tyra looked at the young woman's body. No visible signs of pregnancy. Marcus, she called out to her partner, who had been silent the whole time. Find out from the medics if the victim was pregnant. The man nodded and headed for the medical examiner's office. Miss Kane, what did you plan to do after you were released? Where were you going to go? This way, this is my house. I built it with Elliot. Even though he married your sister? That's why. Something flashed in Audrey's eyes, but it was gone. I wanted to talk to them. Face to face, after 13 years. And what were you planning to say? It doesn't matter now, does it? Audrey replied with cold indifference. Marcus came back with information. Preliminary, the victim was not pregnant. Either the information is wrong or the pregnancy was terminated. Thank you. Tyra nodded. Miss Kane, do you have any idea who might have wanted your husband and sister dead? Elliot's always had enemies. Mining metals is a competitive business, especially when you don't play by the rules. So you continued to break the law after you were incarcerated? I don't know what he was doing all those years. I was in prison, if you remember. Tyra paused, letting Audrey's words hang in the air, then continued. You will receive a copy of your marriage registration papers and death certificate. We'll also check your alibi, your time out of jail, and your cab. For now, please do not leave the city. Audrey nodded with the same detached expression. I'm not going anywhere. I just got home. Tyra stood up and walked over to her partner. Marcus, what do you think? The motive is obvious. The woman did time for her husband while he was having an affair with her sister. But the time of death doesn't match. She couldn't have physically done it. Someone else could have, on her orders. It's possible, but there's no evidence so far. We need to check her contacts at the prison, her phone calls, her visits. Tyra nodded, taking another look at the crime scene. As an experienced detective, she sensed there was more behind this murder than the obvious revenge motive. We'll check the victim's entire neighborhood, colleagues, competitors, friends, and especially anyone who had contact with Audrey Kane during her incarceration. Later at the station, Tyra studied the case files. Indeed, Audrey Kane had been released from Framingham Women's Prison at 8:05 this morning. According to the medical examiner's report, Elliot and Vance's deaths had occurred approximately 72 hours ago. Perfect alibi. Tyra found copies of the letters Elliot had sent to his wife in prison for the first few years. Colorful declarations of love, promises to wait, plans for the future. It's all for us, darling. When you get out, we'll live like kings. Then a gradual cooling off, and finally the news of his marriage to Vance, Audrey's younger sister. Vance expressed regret, but not remorse, in her letters. We didn't plan it, sister. It just happened. I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope you'll understand. Tyra leaned back in her chair, trying to imagine the shock Audrey had felt when she received those letters in her jail cell. 13 years in prison for a husband who had betrayed her with her own sister. A sufficient motive for murder? Absolutely. But the timing didn't add up. Looks like we need to dig deeper, she murmured, looking at Audrey's list of visitors to the prison. The name Nolan Frost came up several times, a former colleague at Kane Minerals. Tyra jotted his name down in her notebook. Maybe it's a lead. Maybe the killer isn't Audrey herself, but someone acting on her behalf. Someone who visited her in prison. Someone she might have had a special connection with. Tyra decided to start by checking all of Audrey's contacts during her incarceration. Someone had helped her get revenge on her husband and sister who betrayed her, and that someone was close enough to commit a murder on the verge of her release. Perfect timing, providing the perfect alibi. Though Audrey Kane had looked genuinely shocked to see the bodies, Tyra couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind that mask of detachment. Something cold and calculating. Something that had been waiting 13 years for revenge. The morning light shone through the blinds in Tyra Morrow's office. It had been 3 days since the bodies of Elliot and Vance Kane had been discovered. On the wall in front of her hung a makeshift investigation board. Crime scene photos, a relationship chart, a timeline, and, of course, a snapshot of Audrey Kane, a woman who'd spent 13 years in prison, and when she'd been released had found her husband and sister dead. Tyra reached for her coffee when Marcus Wells, her partner, knocked on the door. Audrey Kane's alibi check came back, he said, holding out a folder. Everything checks out. She left Framingham Prison at 8 in the morning, got into a cab and arrived home at 9:15. Driver confirms it. So does the video surveillance from the prison gate. She couldn't have physically committed the murders. Tyra nodded, studying the documents. What about the last few days before she was released? Do we have records of her calls, visits? Last month, no visits, only calls to her lawyer. Something doesn't add up, Marcus. She's got too strong a motive for murder, but a perfect alibi. It can't be a coincidence. Marcus shrugged and sat down on the edge of the table. Then we're looking for an accomplice or a hitman. Maybe. Let's look at her surroundings in prison and before. I want to know more about this man, Nolan Frost. He was a frequent visitor to Audrey in prison, former co-worker. Is he still at Kane Minerals now? Yeah, VP of Operations. Been there since the company was founded. Second in command after Audrey and Elliot. Tyra's up, getting her paperwork together. Let's go see him. Kane Minerals' office was located in a glass business center in Boston's business district. The imposing building spoke of the company's success. A security guard escorted the detectives to the 6th floor, where Nolan Frost was already waiting for them. He was about 35, tall, trim, with a short haircut and an attentive gaze. He met them in a spacious office overlooking the city. "Detectives, what can I do for you?" he asked, gesturing for them to sit down. "Terrible tragedy with Elliot and Vance. The whole office is in shock." "Mr. Frost," Tyra began, "were you close to the victims? Elliot and I worked together for almost 15 years. Vance and I met when she started dating him after..." He paused. "After Audrey went to prison. You kept in contact with Audrey Kane during her incarceration?" Nolan nodded, his face remaining impenetrable. "Yes, visited her. We were all upset about what happened. Audrey took all the blame for the financial shenanigans, even though the decisions were made collectively." "Collectively?" Tyra stepped forward. "So Audrey wasn't the only one to blame for the tax evasion?" Nolan tensed, realizing he'd said too much. "I mean, it was Audrey and Elliot's company. The two of them made the key decisions, but officially, the responsibility was hers as CFO. And she willingly took the blame? Yes, she wanted to protect the company. And Elliot." Tyra made a note in her notebook. "When was the last time you saw Audrey?" "About 2 months ago. Visited her in prison." "What did you talk about?" "About her release. How the world had changed in 13 years. About the company." "Did you talk about Elliot and Vance?" Nolan looked away. "Yes, she knew they were married. Of course it was hard to accept." "How did she react? How do you think?" Nolan's voice flashed with irritation. "Her husband married her younger sister while she was in prison for a crime they'd all committed together. She was broken, betrayed." "Angry enough to want them dead?" Marcus asked. Nolan was quiet for a moment. Audrey had always been able to control her emotions. But yes, she was enraged. Though I'm sure she had nothing to do with their deaths. She was in jail when it happened. "Mr. Frost, what was your relationship with Audrey before she was incarcerated?" The question caught Nolan off guard. "Professional, colleagues, just co-workers?" Tyra looked Nolan straight in the eye. "We have evidence that you were more than just co-workers." "I don't know what you mean." Tyra pulled out a copy of a letter found in Audrey's personal belongings at the prison. I miss our nights together, Nolan. After all this, we'll be together again. These are lines from a letter Audrey wrote but never sent. It was found in her cell. Nolan's face changed slightly. Okay, he sighed. We were having an affair. Even before she was arrested. Elliot didn't know. And after her arrest, did you continue to keep in touch? I kept her as a friend, visiting, writing letters. Just as a friend? Tyra insisted. Nolan pressed his lips together. Look, what do you want to hear? Yes, we loved each other. Yes, I waited for her all these years. But I didn't kill Elliot and Vance. I have an alibi for the day of the murder. I was in New York at a metal mining conference. Hundreds of witnesses. Tyra made a note of it. This needs to be looked into. What can you tell us about the Kane Minerals business after Audrey's arrest? Did the company continue to hide earnings? Nolan tensed. I'm not answering that question without a lawyer. I wonder. Tyra stretched out. Did Elliot and Vance know about the ongoing tax fraud? Perhaps they threatened to reveal it? That's absurd. Nolan stood up. Unless you have a warrant, I'd ask you to leave. The detectives looked at each other. Tyra rose slowly. We'll be back, Mr. Frost. Please don't leave town. As they walked out of the building, Marcus shook his head. He's clearly hiding something. And it has to do with the financial fraud that's been going on since Audrey's arrest. Tyra nodded. I want a warrant to review all of Kane Minerals' records for the last 13 years and check his alibi for the day of the murder. Back at the station, Tyra began to put together a new picture of the crime. If Nolan and Audrey had been lovers before her arrest, perhaps their relationship had continued in prison. And if Elliot and Vance were indeed threatening to uncover new tax fraud, Nolan had his own motive for killing them. 2 hours later, Marcus returned with new information. Frost's alibi was only partially confirmed. He was indeed at a conference in New York, but left a day earlier than planned. He was seen there in the morning, but he disappeared in the afternoon. He could have gotten back to Boston by this afternoon. What about the financials? The judge signed the warrant. We'll have access to Kane Minerals accounting tomorrow. Tyra tapped his pen on the desk thoughtfully. I need to talk to Audrey again, but first, let's stop by her former attorney's office. Audrey's attorney, Raymond Chase, received them in his office. An older man with graying hair, he looked tired but focused. Audrey Kane's case was one of the most difficult in my practice, he said, looking through old records. She flatly refused to testify against her husband, even though it could have shortened her sentence considerably. Do you believe Elliot Kane was guilty of tax fraud with her? Tyra asked. I can't violate attorney-client privilege, Chase replied. But I will say this, Audrey wasn't the only person in that company who made financial decisions. What about Nolan Frost? Did he figure in the case? His name came up in documents, but no direct evidence of his involvement. The D.A.S office focused on Audrey because she signed all the financial documents. How would you describe the relationship between Audrey and Nolan? The attorney hesitated for a moment. They were close. That's all I can say. Did he visit her in prison? Regularly. Every week for the first few years, then less often, but he still showed up. Did she say anything about her husband? About his relationship with her sister? Chase shook his head. When Elliot married Vance, Audrey was furious. She called me, telling me that he'd betrayed not only her, but their entire arrangement. That it was all for nothing. Tyra stepped forward. It was all for nothing? What exactly did she mean by that? I'm not sure. Maybe her sacrifice. She'd sat down precisely so that he would continue to run the company, keep their fortune intact. By the time they left the lawyer's office, Tyra had a new picture in her head. Perhaps Audrey had agreed to take the fall not only for her husband, but for her lover Nolan as well. And then Elliot had married her sister, betraying her. And if you add into that equation the threat from Elliot and Vance to expose Nolan's ongoing machinations, the next stop was Audrey Kane's house. Now that forensics had completed their work there, she was back to live there, in the house where her husband and sister had been murdered just a few days ago. Audrey opened the door, still with the same detached expression on her face. She was dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair gathered into a careless bun. Detective Morrow, she said without surprise. Come on in. Tyra stepped into the house. The smell of cleaning products overpowered the odor of decomposition, but not completely. The kitchen, where the bodies had been found, now gleamed with a clean floor. "You cleaned it all up," Tyra remarked. "This is my house," Audrey replied simply. "Tea? No, thank you, Miss Kane. I'd like to ask you a few more questions." Audrey pointed to the couch and sat down in the chair across from her. "I'm listening. Tell me about Nolan Frost." Audrey's face remained impenetrable, but Tyra saw her shoulders tense for a moment. "Nolan was a colleague of ours, vice president of operations." "Just a colleague? What are you talking about?" "We have evidence that you were in a romantic relationship with Nolan Frost before your arrest." Audrey looked at Tyra for a long moment, then nodded faintly. "Yes, we were having an affair. Elliot didn't know. And this relationship continued while you were in prison? Nolan was waiting for me, unlike my husband. He visited you regularly?" "Yes, all 13 years, even after Elliot stopped coming." "Did you discuss Elliot and Vance with him? Their marriage?" Audrey pressed her lips together. "Of course, it was, painful." Nolan was supportive. "Did you discuss the possibility of revenge with him?" Audrey's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Miss Kane, we have reason to believe that tax fraud at Kane Minerals continued after your arrest, and that Nolan Frost was involved. Elliot and Vance may have begun to suspect something and threatened to expose it." Audrey was silent, but Tyra noticed the white knuckles of her fingers gripping the arm of the chair. "I've been in prison for 13 years, Detective. I don't know what's been going on at the company all that time." "But Nolan told you. Were you aware that the fraud was still going on?" "That's speculation, nothing more." "I think you knew," Tyra insisted. "And when you found out about Elliot and Vance's marriage, that was the last straw. You realized that your sacrifice had been for nothing, that you'd done time for the man who betrayed you. And that's when you and Nolan started plotting your revenge." "I was in prison when they were killed," Audrey replied coldly. "It's confirmed. Yes, you were. But Nolan wasn't, and his alibi for the day of the murder is not fully confirmed." Audrey stood up, her face hard. "I think it's time we ended this conversation. If you need anything else, feel free to contact my attorney." Tyra stood up as well. "Miss Kane, do not leave town. The investigation is ongoing." Already in the car, Marcus looked at Tyra thoughtfully. "She's hiding something." "Definitely," Tyra nodded. "And it has to do with Nolan Frost. We need to access their correspondence in prison, their visitation records, and especially the financial records of Kane Minerals." The next day, a team of police financial auditors began a review of the company's records. By evening, they had their first results. The fraud had been going on for all 13 years, the chief auditor reported, handing Tyra a thick folder. The same schemes as before. Hiding revenues from gold and platinum mining and foreign concessions, overstating costs, fictitious contracts, everything Audrey Kane went to jail for. Who signed the documents? Mostly Nolan Frost, but in the last 2 years, Elliot Kane's signature has been showing up. Looks like he's starting to get into the financial side of the business. Tyra nodded. That confirmed her theory. "What about the correspondence between Nolan and Audrey?" Marcus placed another folder in front of her. "We got copies of all the registered letters Nolan sent to Audrey in prison. At first glance, nothing suspicious. Support, company news, personal stuff, but there's something interesting." He pointed to one of the sheets. "About 6 months before the murder, the nature of the letters changes. Strange phrases appear. The problem will be solved soon. Everything will be ready for your return. There's nothing they can do. Could it be code? Could be. One more thing. For the last 2 months before Audrey's release, Nolan stopped writing her formal letters, but the visits continued every week." Tyra wondered. They could communicate in person, without the risk of the letters being read, and make a plan. Tyra walked over to the board where all the facts of the case were organized and began to rearrange the diagram. "So what do we have?" Audrey Kane and Nolan Frost were lovers before her arrest. She took the blame for the tax fraud, protecting not only her husband but Nolan as well. While she was in jail, Nolan continued the scheme, making millions. Elliot, after betraying his wife, married her sister, and then apparently he began to suspect that Nolan was continuing the scheme. Perhaps he and Vance threatened to expose it. "And that's when Nolan and Audrey decided to take them out," Marcus continued. Audrey was in jail with a perfect alibi. Nolan did the dirty work, the perfect crime. But the motive still leads to Audrey. It would undermine her alibi in court, Tyra objected. Only if we can prove collusion, Marcus replied. And for that, we need direct evidence of their communication about the murder plan. Tyra nodded. They needed to find something concrete, and she knew where to look. I want to check Audrey's prison cell, all of her personal belongings. There might be something there. The next day, they gained access to Audrey's personal belongings that she had left behind in prison. Among other things, there was a small notebook filled with small handwriting. Most of the entries are about daily life in prison, Marcus said, flipping through the pages. But here, in the last few months before her release, she starts writing strange phrases. When the snake bites, the venom does not act immediately. Freedom begins before the cage is opened. N will have everything arranged for my return. N is Nolan, Tyra said. They were really planning this together. She turned a few more pages and stopped. Here. They're threatening to reveal everything. N says A found the documents. W supports him. They don't realize they're jeopardizing everything we've built. N promises to solve the problem before I'm released. When I get back, it'll all be over. Marcus whistled. That was practically a confession. They were planning an assassination. Tyra closed the book. It was enough for an arrest warrant. Both Audrey and Nolan. Both guilty of planning a murder, even if only he physically committed it. An hour later, they had warrants. Tyra decided to take Nolan first. She feared that, warned by Audrey, he might flee. The Kane Minerals office greeted them with the hustle and bustle of the workday, but Nolan Frost's office was empty. He left for a meeting an hour ago, the secretary said. He should be back by this evening. Where exactly did he go? Tyra asked, showing her badge. Didn't say, just left in a hurry. Tyra felt her heart clench. Did he have time to find out about their investigation? Let's go to Audrey's, she ordered. Now. Tyra pushed the gas pedal harder than she should have. Marcus gripped the door handle. Tyra, we won't be able to hold them off if we crash on the way. He was right, but his gut was screaming at the detective that they should hurry. When you've been weaving a web of revenge for 13 years, you don't wait until you're caught red-handed. Why hadn't Audrey fled immediately after the murder? Tyra pondered aloud as she overtook the van around the bend. She'd had plenty of time. Maybe that was their plan, Marcus replied. Staging her return home, the discovery of the bodies, the perfect alibi, and then disappear with the company's money. The car took a sharp turn, and 10 minutes later, they were pulling up to Audrey Kane's house. A black SUV was parked in the driveway. Tyra instantly recognized Nolan Frost's car. Call for backup, she commanded, drawing her weapon. They're both here. The detectives approached the house cautiously. Through the living room window, they could see Audrey and Nolan hurriedly packing. There were some documents and passports on the table. They're going to run, Marcus whispered. Reinforcements will be here in 7 minutes. We can't wait, Tyra replied. If we lose them now, they'll disappear. Go around the back entrance. Marcus nodded and disappeared behind the house. Tyra took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and rang the bell. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, the door opened. Audrey stood on the threshold, her face tense when she saw the detective. Detective Morrow, what brings you here? May I come in, Miss Kane? I have some new questions. Audrey hesitated, but then stepped back, letting Tyra inside. The living room was empty of belongings and papers. Apparently Nolan had hidden them away. I was just about to call you, Audrey said in a steady voice. I got some new information that might help with the investigation. Really? Tyra looked around the room, noting the signs of hurried packing. What kind of information? At that moment, Nolan came out of the hallway. When he saw Tyra, he froze. Detective, I didn't expect to see you here. I can see that, Tyra replied dryly. You disappeared from the office rather suddenly. Urgent business. Nolan shrugged, but his eyes raced around the room, searching for avenues of escape. Tyra slowly shifted her gaze from one to the other. Nolan was tense as a string. Audrey remained outwardly calm, but the detective could see her fingers twitching. Miss Kane, Mr. Frost, Tyra began. We found a notebook in your prison things, Audrey. Quite an interesting read. especially the entries about how Nolan promises to solve the problem before your release. Audrey's face froze. Nolan took an almost imperceptible step toward the exit. "I don't know what you're talking about," Audrey said. "I think you do." Tyra pulled out a copy of a page from her notebook. "They're threatening to expose everything. N says A found the documents, B supports him. They don't realize they're jeopardizing everything we've built. N promises to solve the problem before I'm released. When I get back, it'll all be over." "Your words, Audrey." Nolan turned sharply toward Audrey. "Did you keep notes?" His voice was quiet but full of rage. "Did you record our conversations?" "It's not what you think," Audrey said quickly, looking at Tyra. "I was referring to the company's financial problems. Nolan promised to have it all sorted out by the time I got back. This has nothing to do with the murder." "Don't lie to me," Nolan hissed. "You said everything was clean, that you weren't suspected of anything. And you, Nolan, you said you were at a conference in New York the day of the murder," Tyra interjected. "But you left before the scheduled time. You had plenty of time to get back to Boston and commit the murder." Nolan's eyes darted to the back door where Marcus should have been. Tyra realized he was ready to run at any moment. "Do you have an arrest warrant?" Audrey asked, her voice cold as ice. "If not, I'd ask you to leave." "I do," Tyra replied. "For both of you. Conspiracy to murder. And that's just the beginning. I'm sure the prosecutor will add tax evasion and many other interesting counts." Audrey and Nolan looked at each other. At that moment, Tyra noticed an almost imperceptible movement of Nolan's hand. He was reaching for something behind his belt. "Don't do that," she warned, pointing the gun. "Hands where I can see them, both of them." Nolan slowly raised his hands. "This is a mistake, Detective. You have nothing but vague notes and coincidences. We have Kane Minerals' financial records," Tyra parried, "which show that the fraud continued for the entire 13 years Audrey was in prison. Under your direction, Nolan. And from the looks of it, Elliot was beginning to realize that. Maybe even threatened to expose you?" A shadow of concern flashed across Nolan's face. Tyra continued. "And for Audrey, her husband's betrayal was a double blow, wasn't it? She sat for both of you, Nolan, and Elliot. Sacrificed 13 years of her life. And not only did he not wait for her, he married her sister." Tyra noticed Audrey's lips tighten. She cast a glance at Nolan and continued. "But the plan was good. Nolan kills Elliot and Vance right before your release, Audrey. You go back, find the bodies, call the police. You have the perfect alibi. You were in jail at the time. No one can blame you." "It's all speculation," Audrey hissed. "No," Tyra shook her head. "These are facts. You were planning how to get rid of Elliot and Vance. They became a threat, financially for Nolan and emotionally for you, Audrey. Their death solved all the problems in one fell swoop." Tyra took a step closer to Nolan. "We have proof of your machinations, Nolan. We know that Elliot began to suspect you, that he could have revealed everything, and then you'd be in Audrey's shoes, behind bars for years." Nolan was silent, but his gaze darted between Tyra and Audrey. Tyra realized he needed to drive a wedge between the accomplices. "You know what's interesting?" She turned to Audrey. "Vance's name has been popping up in the financial records for the last few years. She wasn't just Elliot's wife. She became the CFO of Kane Minerals. And from the looks of it, she was damn good at it. So much so that she started finding inconsistencies in Nolan's reports." "What?" Audrey turned on Nolan. "You said she was just a decorative figure, that Elliot had her for show." "Audrey, don't listen to her," Nolan said hastily. "She's trying to turn us against each other." "Vance was smart," Tyra continued. "Maybe even smarter than you, Audrey. And she revealed Nolan's schemes. That's why they both had to die. Not just because of your revenge, Audrey. Nolan was protecting his own skin." Audrey's face contorted with anger. "Was it true?" she asked, looking at Nolan. "Did my sister expose your machinations?" Nolan didn't answer, and that was more eloquent than any words. "You used me," Audrey said quietly. "My desire for revenge. You didn't just want to get rid of them because of me. You needed to silence them." "Audrey, don't be stupid," Nolan hissed. "We planned this together. You're just as guilty as I am." Tyra decided to use this moment of discord. "Hands behind your back, Nolan," she commanded, pulling out the handcuffs. "You're under arrest for the murder of Elliot and Vance Kane." Stay away from me, Nolan warned, backing away. His hand went to his belt again. Last chance to surrender peacefully, Tyra said. The reinforcements are already here. Nolan cast a quick glance out the window, then at Audrey. A decision flashed in his eyes a second before action. He abruptly drew his gun and pointed it at Tyra. "Drop the gun!" she shouted, aiming at him. "No," Nolan said hoarsely. "I'm not going to jail. She planned this whole thing." He nodded at Audrey. "She's obsessed with revenge. I was just doing what she asked." "Liar!" Audrey exclaimed. "It was you who suggested killing them. You said that Elliot had found out about your machinations and was going to turn you in." At that moment, Marcus burst through the back door with his gun at the ready. "Police! On the floor now!" Nolan, realizing he was cornered, suddenly pointed the gun at Audrey. "It was her. I can prove it. I have tapes of our conversations in prison." "Put the gun down!" Marcus shouted. Tyra saw Nolan's muscles tense, her finger twitching on the trigger. She knew she had a split second to decide. "Nolan," she said calmly, "think about it. You kill her, so what? You go away for life. We already have proof of your collusion. Audrey's right. You're both guilty." "I'm not going to prison," Nolan repeated. "Not for her. Not for Elliot. I'm done." He turned the gun back on Tyra. The next second, a gunshot rang out. Nolan shrieked and fell to his knee, grabbing his shoulder. His gun fell out of his hand. Marcus was instantly at his side, pinning him to the floor and cuffing him. "Are you okay?" he asked Tyra. She nodded, then turned to Audrey, who stood frozen with a look of strange detachment on her face. "Audrey Kane, you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to murder Elliot and Vance Kane." As Tyra read Audrey her rights, she didn't resist. It wasn't until the handcuffs clicked on her wrists that she looked up at the detective. "Do you know what betrayal is, Detective Morrow?" she asked quietly. "When the person you sacrificed everything to forgets about you as if you never existed?" "It doesn't justify murder," Tyra replied. "No, it doesn't," Audrey agreed. "But it helps me understand. 13 years I waited, believing we'd be together. And he chose my sister. My little sister, you know." Backups arrived. 2 officers took Nolan away. Tyra took Audrey outside where a police car was waiting. "I didn't know Nolan was using me," Audrey said before getting into the car. "I thought he was doing it for us, that we were going to start a new life together." "But you knew he was going to kill your husband and sister," Tyra clarified. "And you went along with it." Audrey looked away, beyond the horizon. "Sometimes revenge seems like the only thing you have left," she said. "It's only when it's done that you realize how empty it is." Tyra closed the door of the police car. As she watched the car with Audrey drive away, she felt not triumph, but a strange heaviness. Their history was woven of betrayals, each one spawning a new, even worse one. Later, at the station, as Tyra was filling out a report, Marcus approached her. "Nolan's cracked," he said. "He confessed to everything. Says it was Audrey's idea to kill them just before she was released, to give her an alibi, but confirms that Elliot and Vance really started to suspect him of the ongoing fraud. They threatened to reveal everything." "And these tapes that Nolan mentioned? The conversations with Audrey in prison?" "Found them on a flash drive in his car. He was secretly recording their conversations. Seemed like insurance in case things went wrong." Tyra nodded. Traitors to the end. Didn't even trust each other. "The story began with betrayal and ended with betrayal," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Audrey betrayed the law for her husband. Elliot betrayed her by marrying her sister. Nolan betrayed them all. And they all paid for it," Tyra concluded, closing the case file. "2 with their lives, 2 with their freedom." When Tyra got home that evening, she sat at the window for a long time, remembering Audrey's blank stare. A woman who had served 13 years for others, who had lost her youth, her love, her family, all for a revenge that had ended up accomplishing nothing but more sacrifice and loss. Tyra thought about the chain of compromises and betrayals that led to this tragedy. How Audrey's one moral choice to take the blame for the tax crimes set off a chain reaction that ended in a double murder. How each new betrayal became more horrifying than the last. And she couldn't help but wonder, how many similar stories were unfolding right now, as yet unseen by the world? How many people are taking the first step down a road that will eventually lead them to inevitable tragedy? Detective Tyra Morrow knew there were no answers to those questions, but she also knew she'd be back on the job tomorrow to unravel another web of lies, betrayal, and crime. Because sometimes the truth is all that can be countered by the darkness that lives in people's hearts.